week 1 of the fantasy football season. And here's a few wide receivers I would bench this week. The first guy's Brandon Cooks of the Houston Texans. That's going to be a long and a horrible season, it looks like, here for the Texans. And obviously, Deshaun Watson, he's had the off-field issues, and he's not going to be the starting quarterback for this Texan team here in week 1. So Tyrod Taylor is going to be the guy over there. And to be honest, I don't know what Tyrod Taylor really has left, and if he could even get the ball to his wide receivers. I know over there in Houston, they don't got many options at the receiver position. I know they signed Danny Amendola to a contract last night, but is he going to be ready? And also, he's up there in age already at 36 years old. But Brandon Cooks, all the defense is going to be focused on him here. And he's got a pretty decent matchup on paper versus the Jacksonville Jaguars, especially at home here in Houston, which is indoors, obviously. But right here, Brandon Cooks, maybe if I need a fourth wide receiver while I'm playing in a 2 flex league, he's a guy I would start. But in standard formats with 2 receivers in a flex, there's no way I'm going to start Brandon Cooks this week. He's a guy that should be your 4th or 5th wide receiver on your roster and a guy on your bench, because right here, he's going to have an inconsistent quarterback. A lot of teams are going to focus the defense on Cooks, especially in the secondary. But the only factor for him that I could see where he could be pretty productive this season, if obviously they're playing catch up the whole game and they're down 2 or 3 scores and they got to keep throwing the ball 40 or 50 times, where he's going to get targets and just the volume to contribute. But I don't think Brandon Cooks is a guy I would start this week here with a bad quarterback, not the greatest of matchups, and just a lot of defenses are going to focus in on him. So right here, I think he's an easy receiver to bench this week. The next wide receiver is JuJu SmithSchuster of the Pittsburgh Steelers. So last season, it was an on and off season for JuJu SmithSchuster. And this season, he went about 9th, 10th round in most fantasy drafts. And this week, he's got a tough matchup at the Buffalo Bills here. I don't like many Pittsburgh Steelers in this matchup. I think this game's going to be a grind-out type of ball game, even though I think it could also be a shootout as well. But either way, JuJu SmithSchuster, I don't think he's that consistent of a receiver. We've seen it over the last couple seasons here with him, even though last season he had 97 catches with this Steeler offense. But right here, and obviously Deontay Johnson are the real number 1 and 2 wide receivers over there, with Juju more of their 3rd receiver and background type of guy, because I think those guys are better in talent. I think those guys obviously bring more to the table in fantasy football than Juju. And this week, I just don't like the matchup greatly. I said to bench Big Ben, and I'm saying to bench Juju, because I could see a mediocre game out of Juju for sure, where he only gets 4 or 5 catches for maybe 60 yards in this ball game. And that's obviously not very productive. The next wide receiver I would bench this week is Odell Beckham Jr. of the Cleveland Browns. So Odell Beckham coming off another devastating injury last season with the torn ACL. And right here, throughout his Brown career, he pretty much hasn't done much. I know last season he showed some flashes, especially in a ball game versus the Dallas Cowboys. But that Cowboy defense can't stop no one, so that's not saying much. And now, after coming off another bad injury with the ACL here, he's got a pretty tough matchup at the Kansas City Chiefs, who obviously, once the Chiefs get up to a big lead, they make offenses one-dimensional and they start teeing off at the quarterback. And right here, I think their game plan is going to be try to stop Nick Chubb and try to stop Odell Beckham. And I think the easier assignment is for them to stop Odell Beckham here in this ball game. And I just can't trust Beckham. Many fantasy owners still rank him pretty high amongst the league, and they've drafted him as their number 2 wide receivers in many leagues I've seen this season. But right here, I can't trust him. He hasn't had a 1,000-yard season here in Odell Beckham in the last couple of years with injuries and just inconsistent play. And this season, I don't think this Brown team is going to be as good as it was last year. More teams are going to be aware, and teams are going to try to take Odell Beckham out of the game plan in this one. And that's what I think happened. So I just can't trust Beckham. And he's another guy where I could see a similar stat line to JuJu SmithSchuster with a couple catches for maybe 50 or 60 yards in this ball game. The next wide receiver is Kenny Golladay of the New York Giants. So Kenny Golladay, he's been an injury-riddled wide receiver the last few seasons, and now he's with his new ball club in New York. And right here, when this guy plays, he's a good wide receiver for fantasy football, no doubt about it. But it's a lot of what-ifs with him, and now he's getting a downgraded quarterback, in my opinion, from playing with Matthew Stafford to Daniel Jones this season. So right here, he's banged up as well with a hamstring injury. and it looks like he's probably going to play, but he also could be on the questionable side of things. And the same thing with Barkley. I said to bench Barkley because he's not going to be 100% and out there the whole game. And the same thing with Kenny Golladay. One wrong cut or one wrong turn or jumping, this guy could go down with a bad hamstring injury. So this week it's a pretty tough matchup versus the Denver Broncos, who one thing they could do is still play pretty stout defense. And I think that's what's going to happen once again this week. If Golladay finds the end zone, it wouldn't surprise me either, but I just can't trust him with the injury and the pretty tough matchup. And this week I would shy away from him in week 1, especially if you want to get off to a good start. If you got players that you drafted in the middle rounds and you're on the fence about them because of injuries or just inconsistency, this week I would bench him because you want to get off to a start. You don't want to fall 0-1. And guys like Kenny Golladay and Odell Beckham, you just can't be sure about them coming off injuries and not being productive really as well. And the 5th and final wide receiver I would bench this week is DJ Chark of the Jacksonville Jaguars. So DJ Chark, another guy coming off injury, had hand surgery a few weeks ago, but Urban Meyer said he'll be ready to go in week 1 versus Houston. But DJ Chark last season was a disappointment, in my opinion. Chark, especially after that good rookie year he had in 2019 when he was one of the better wide receivers in that draft class and a surprise in fantasy football. But this year I know he's got the upgrade here with Trevor Lawrence. But I'm going to take a wait-and-see approach here with DJ Chark, who is a player that went anywhere from the 10th to the 12th round in fantasy football leagues. So right here, I don't think Chark's going to be that consistent this season once again. Marvin Jones, I think, will be the more consistent wide receiver over there in Jacksonville. But I see James Robinson having a big role as well coming out of the backfield, catching passes. But right here in week 1, I'm going to take a wait-and-see with Chark. I know he's got a pretty good matchup at the Houston Texans, but I think it's going to be a James Robinson type of game. And I said James Robinson is a running back I definitely want to start this week in my running backs to start. So this week, I think this ball game is going to be a close one. And I think the Jacksonville Jaguars are going to take this game and control the clock in the second half. So right here, I don't see a huge game out of Chark. 60, 70 yards probably, maybe 4 or 5 catches. And he's just a guy I'm going to shy away from this week and see what he could do. So that's a few wide receivers I would bench here in week 1 of the fantasy football season.